Movie magic is what transports us to unique worlds and what brings magical characters to life. But have you ever wondered what some iconic screen moments would look like without their visual effects? In this video, we'll be taking you behind the scenes of some of the most iconic moments from your favorite movies and TV shows. As much as we wish it was possible, we all know that humans just can't fly and that the Hulk just doesn't exist. So how exactly do they make things like superheroes and dinosaurs seem so real? It all happens in the editing room. So let's take a look at the behind the scenes of sets like Maleficent, The Hunger Games, and The Avengers before all the CGI gets added in.
Would you like to see?
Is it safe?
From the monstrous waves to the debris that line the water during battle, Pirates of the Caribbean is full of dashes of CGI and VFX editing that bring the movie to life. But there's one specific moment from The Dead Men Tell No Tales that looks completely different behind the scenes.
Shark.
The ghost shark scene featuring Jack Sparrow and Henry Turner was filmed in 3 different locations: an actual outdoor scenery, a small water tank, and an indoor set that was completely blue screen. Their rowboat was put on a gimbal so that it would give the appearance that they were actually being attacked by sharks. Angelina Jolie put her all into the making of Maleficent, but no matter how much of a renegade she was on screen, her character would not have come to life without the help of CGI, VFX, and a very interesting machine called a fork tuner. Angelina was secured into a machine that was controlled by other people in order to get the motions right. They basically became puppets while filming. Everything was completely blue screen, and her wings were added later on in editing. The fairies in their small form were also completely animated using a special program. The actresses' faces were processed so that they'd be able to copy their exact animation later on. It's probably no surprise that the majority of this film is CGI and visual effects. But what might surprise you is how Baby Groot and Rocket looked behind the scenes. They were, well, basically not there. Both characters are completely CGI.
I'm Groot.
No!
During filming, they'd have stuffed animals and models as stand-ins so the actors wouldn't be completely lost. Beauty and the Beast is where most millennials got their first taste of love and romance. But there's nothing lovely and romantic about how Beauty and the Beast looked behind the scenes. Dan Stevens didn't have a super realistic Beast costume. Instead, he wore a motion capture suit. The costume helped the editors use CGI to make the Beast come to life later on. The Be Our Guest scene was also pretty lackluster behind the scenes. Lumiere's grand performance was later added in during editing, which left Emma Watson acting at a fancy table alone.
Be our guest, we are guest, be our guest.
Avatar took 10 years to make, so you can only imagine how much effort went into making everything perfect. Pandora itself was created completely using green screen and VFX. But what's even more interesting is the way the avatars were brought to life. The actors wore motion capture suits to film their scenes, and also had to get 3D models of themselves done so they could digitally make their avatar based on their appearance later on.
Looks like you. This is your avatar now, Jake.
A whopping 300 shots were made using VFX for Divergent to produce the utopian city we see in the film. That includes the dauntless train jumping scene that catapults Triss into the world of danger. It was actually filmed in 6 different locations, with a platform that was completely made later with visual effects. What you see in the film is actually the editing team blending clips from different locations to seamlessly fit together.
Is it just me? Or are they trying to kill us?
Taylor Lautner didn't get a special wolf suit. Instead, he explored the magical qualities gray spandex had to offer and acted out his scenes with Kristen Stewart to make sure she got the eye contact right. Then the VFX team did their magic and created Jacob's wolf form later on. They also used CGI to edit actress Mackenzie Foy's face on different aged children after Renesmee was born. Let's just be grateful we dodged them using Chuck Esme.
It was Nessie who wanted me there.
Nessie? You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?
Grey's Anatomy may not have the need for fancy editing like CGI and VFX, but their special effects and prop team have their work cut out for them. The show brings to life some pretty realistic medical procedures. What you're actually seeing is the actors working on a dummy full of animal intestines.
What the hell is that thing?
Oh, that is a kidney in a jar. That's not fair. How did you get that?
In Narnia, characters like Aslan were completely computer-generated. The actors would have to act out their scenes alone. To make it a little bit easier, they would have stand-ins where the character would be. For Aslan, they even came up with a type of model that could be controlled by someone inside. That way, they could get some of his movements naturally. Girl on Fire, Catching Fire. Fire was a huge part of the Hunger Games franchise, and the majority of the time it was added into shots using CGI and VFX.
Well, I was just hoping that I wouldn't burn to death.
For instance, Katniss's costumes both in the first, second, and third films were all thanks to the editing team. And Jennifer Lawrence actually filmed the scene where Katniss runs from the flames in the arena completely without fire. The Dark Forest was huge in the Wizard of Oz spin-off, and it wouldn't have been able to come alive without CGI.
Hate the Dark Forest! Hate the Dark Forest!
During filming, James Franco actually had to dodge poles meant to be the tree branches of the forest that were controlled by the crew. The China Glass Girl was also completely done in the editing room. For the space scenery in the movie, almost everything was shot using a green screen. The filmmakers also had to find the perfect way to make it seem like the actors were acting without gravity. For the majority of the filming, they were strapped into a harness to give the camera effect that they were floating in space. The Red Queen might not have seemed as malicious and intimidating if it wasn't for her disproportioned head, or if it wasn't Helena Bonham Carter.
I used to have the White Queen, you know. Her head is so small.
It's tiny. It's a pimple of a head.
But her body proportions were only altered in editing. For filming, she looked completely normal. There were also a bunch of other iconic scenes that looked interesting behind the scenes.
Welcome to Jurassic World.
Jurassic World may have had its audiences believing that dinosaurs might one day roam the Earth again, but for a lot of the filming, no type of dinosaur, fake or real, was even present. Instead, the actors would perform the scene while being mindful of the markers that told them where the dinosaurs were meant to be. If the actor had a scene where they were interacting with the dinosaur, they would have people dress up in fake dinosaur heads and act as a stand-in. The most impressive part of the Avengers Endgame is probably how well they made the Hulk scenes come to life. Mark Ruffalo wore a special motion suit and headpiece while acting, so that they'd later be able to transform him and his facial features into the hero.
Put the brains and the brawn together, and now look at me. Best of both worlds.
Another notable CGI moment is when they had to actually use programs to create Captain Marvel's hair. The iconic moment that Black Panther rose from the fire and ashes to show everyone he was still alive,
I am not dead!
is probably something I and a lot of other Marvel fans will never forget. But behind the scenes, all Chadwick Boseman had to do was step onto some foam blocks, and the rest was all edited in. The only character in The Jungle Book who wasn't the product of CGI or VFX was Mowgli. The rest of his jungle friends were made with CGI. The actor had fake animals on set to help him imagine the scene and deliver his lines better. The majority of the jungle was also completely done using CGI.
Relax, kid. No need to get worked up, okay?
Daenerys flying her dragon is nothing short of magical, but behind the scenes, it was a little less graceful. They had Emilia Clarke climb up on an animatronic dragon surrounded by a green screen that would mimic the movements of flying. The editor's job was to bring all of that to life. Sorry to say, folks, but Gollum really doesn't exist. Not even behind the scenes. Unless you count his actor, Andy Serkis, dressed up in a motion suit saying, precious. But the credit all goes to the visual effects team who brought the character to life perfectly. Are we really surprised that a portion of this film was spent on a yacht? All these scenes were actually filmed in a studio with green screens. The iconic scene where the yacht is taken over by some pretty intense waves wouldn't have been possible without CGI and visual effects either.
So that's what Pandora actually looks like. James Cameron's Avatar is one of the most visually stunning films ever made. But what does it look like without all the CGI?
The animators have taken what the actors are doing and gone even beyond that.
Neytiri lives a pretty unique lifestyle as one of the Na'vi on the planet of Pandora. One of the things that we see Neytiri partake in is drinking water from a leaf. But because director James Cameron loves to rely on technology innovation, the way that the scene was actually filmed without CGI may surprise you. Zoe Saldana was required to work with a gray plastic contraption to model as the leaf, while holding a water bottle covered in duct tape to simulate water coming from the tape. We guess that's why they call it movie magic.
It's the most high-tech film in terms of its execution.
You may or may not have had an awkward kiss in your life, but it probably wasn't as awkward as it was for Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldana when they had to kiss as Jake and Neytiri while filming Avatar. While in the movie itself, with all the added CGI, the scene plays out romantically. Without all the CGI, Worthington and Saldana had to kiss with their motion capture jumpsuits and with green dots all over their face, so that the motion capture on their characters' CGI bodies would be accurate and more real.
We created a manually operated gimbal rig that they could balance on.
One of the most exciting action scenes in all of Avatar was definitely the flying Banshee. Obviously, a lot of CGI was needed to be done to bring the Banshee to life, as there's no living, real-world counterpart to the creature. In order to capture Jake flying on the Banshee, Sam Worthington was required to fly on the back of a moving plastic structure, where he'd be flung around with wires, all while wearing the motion capture suit. Honestly, we think we'd just prefer the ride at Disney World that seems a bit more comfortable.
See them flying these things, they're working hard.
It's always intense whenever anybody in a movie yells, but when a blue-skinned alien like Neytiri yells, it's even more powerful.
You will never be one of the people!
Despite the goofy motion capture getup and the silly plastic Na'vi ears, Saldana was still able to be quite intimidating on set. Layers of additional CGI were added in order to make Neytiri and the rest of the Na'vi look even more real in the film. You definitely wouldn't want to tick Neytiri off.
I at least have no idea that I'm wearing this. I feel like I'm blue and I'm 9 feet tall.
The big villain of Avatar was Stephen Lang's Colonel Miles Quaritch, who, unlike a lot of the other characters who required CG, is actually a human. One might assume that the Colonel's mech suit design was all CGI, but they would be wrong. The main core design of the suit was a practical effect, but it was the arm and the digital screens that were later added with additional CGI work, in order to make the suit a more formidable force to the Na'vi. The final product proved to be quite the treat to the Na'vi, and made Lang's Colonel an even more memorable villain. With rumors that he'll be back for the sequel, he may even bring that mech suit back.
Oh yeah, who's bad? That's right.
One of the first dangerous creatures that Jake encounters in the jungles of Pandora is the fierce Thanator. While the Thanator is quite intimidating on screen, the creature wasn't much to look at before the CGI was added. In fact, before the CGI was added, standing in for the Thanator was a red tennis ball on a long gray stick held by a crew member. In order for the actors to go on cue, the crew member holding the Thanator's stand-in would lunge at them. Life on Pandora would likely be much easier if all the Na'vi had to worry about was a tennis ball on a stick. Cameron has a knack for working with actors and actresses he's worked with before, so of course, one of the actresses he brought with him to Avatar was his alien star, Sigourney Weaver. Weaver plays Grace in the film and doesn't just play the character in human form, but also as a Na'vi. While even in her Na'vi form, Grace typically wears human clothes. Behind the scenes, Weaver had to still wear a motion capture suit to convincingly play Grace's Na'vi avatar. From Alien to Ghostbusters, Sigourney Weaver has clearly made her mark in the sci-fi genre.
We had horses galloping around this place.
It wasn't just the human actors who were behind motion capture technology on the set of Avatar, as actual horses were used under motion capture technology for the dire horses. The horses were equipped with dots on their body, much like their human co-stars, in order for them to be transformed later with visual effects. The horses were brought to the soundstage of the film, and Cameron would film the actors behind the Na'vi riding the horses with the special technology that would allow him to be their CGI counterparts as they were filming. Who knows, maybe those horses went on to take other motion capture roles as well. Despite all the extensive CGI and motion capture present throughout Avatar, that didn't mean the actors had to perform less stunts. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Whenever we saw the Na'vi climbing up the vines of the ominous floating rocks on Pandora, Cameron had the actors behind the Na'vi climb a similar structure, all in their motion capture gear. The final CGI was added later, but still, that didn't make the climb not dangerous. Though you can't really become one of the Na'vi without at least getting a little bit rugged with yourself and your environment. Motion capture wasn't always available when capturing scenes with the Na'vi, especially when they shared the screen with the human characters. When recording the scene where Jake first wakes up in his Na'vi form, Cameron filmed the actors playing the human doctors working around an empty gurney. Behind the lens of Cameron's camera, he was able to see the CGI character.
We went to Kauai, we went way up in the mountains, and we acted out the scenes.
Before the motion capture work was done for Avatar, Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldana filmed without their suits, half naked in Hawaii. This would be done in order so James Cameron could know how to plan all their scenes that would need motion capture, such as the bow and arrow scene. The Tree of Voices is perhaps one of the most gorgeous looking set pieces in all of Avatar, but behind the scenes and without the CGI, that sacred tree wasn't much to look at. In fact, the trees were mainly just pieces of rope that were used to simulate the long leaves and branches of the trees that Neytiri would present to Jake. The final CGI would be added into the production later.
To say these stunt guys, I mean, they gave us their all.
The Na'vi clearly have a different culture than what we're used to, and Cameron wanted to display some of the tribal customs of the main tribe in the film. The group of 4 actors may not have had the biggest roles in the film, but that didn't mean their work wasn't difficult. These actors ultimately had to memorize a tribal dance of the Na'vi in all their motion capture suits. Now that's true commitment to the craft.
If this was CG, I could have moved that in 30 seconds. So the whole time I was shooting the virtual camera, I was complaining that it wasn't live action.
While there were times on set where James Cameron and his crew had more accurate models of the Dragon assault ships, there were times where the models wouldn't be enough. In order to film the scene, Cameron had the motion capture board use a metal-like chair in the middle of the set that would be moved around by crew members. A fan was also placed in front of the actors in order to properly capture the wind blowing in their characters' faces. While the real set may not have been as exciting as actually flying on a ship as a Na'vi on Pandora, the cast and crew certainly made the most of it.
They developed the most lightweight 3D system possible, so it's a very sophisticated technology.
The 3D, much like the CGI, had to be recorded in a distinct way, using 2 cameras. This scene where the Colonel is attacked on his mech by one of the Na'vi used 2 cameras to perfect the 3D and the CGI. One camera would be used for the live action elements, and the other would be used for the CG 3D elements.
I need you to put up $10 million to prove we can make this movie.
Far From Home wouldn't be the same movie without its incredible special effects. Everything from touching up Spidey's suits to creating the elementals required multiple companies, hundreds of people, and hours of work. So we'll spend this video breaking down their additions to the film and just how incomplete it would look without them.
In every interview, he's like, when I wear the bubble hat, and I'm like, no you didn't.
Far From Home's most memorable scene has got to be the intense illusion battle, the big midway fight sequence of the film. Framestore, the company in charge of this sequence, was given an unusual amount of freedom to create the scene. They weren't given a set script to follow. Instead, they were given the creative freedom to come up with the concepts for the illusions at the same time they were animating and adding effects to the shots. This gave them the unique opportunity to provide direction for the on-set production team, for example with this shot where MJ is attacked by Mysterio. Framestore blocked out the animation ahead of time with a CG MJ, complete with precise lighting from the moon and lights of the Eiffel Tower. This rendered footage was passed along to the set production, who were able to recreate the exact lighting Framestore needed for the shot. This allowed them to slip Zendaya's performance into the final product looking absolutely perfect. By the way, the construction site where the battle takes place? 100% CG. Framestore created the entire building model, adding Tom Holland's mocap footage on top. They used a mocap suit instead of filming Tom in costume to save time on set. All of those reality-bending illusions would have meant way too many costume changes for just one sequence. That nightmare-inducing zombie Iron Man utilized mocap as well. Framestore went through several designs for the undead hero, finding the right balance to be horrifying without showing anything too gruesome. The final product finds a good middle ground, resembling a mummy beneath the broken bits of machinery. Marvel moviegoers are no stranger to the incredible holograms of this cinematic universe, which means the VFX teams have to keep their designs consistent with the Marvel style, while putting in a few new twists to keep the visuals from getting stale for longtime fans. For this scene, where Mysterio is introduced as Quentin Beck and explains the elemental attacks, filming was done using a special lightbox table. Rising Sun Pictures had to not only design and place the holograms in the scene, but adjust the lighting and colors depending on which holograms were showing to make them look like they were really in the room with the actors. The work had to be done in layers, sometimes completely removing the lighting from on set. The lighting in the raw footage lacks the subtle colors reflecting from the holograms that don't just make the scene look pretty, but create an atmosphere to complement the actors' performances. Sometimes an actor's job boils down to fighting invisible monsters on set. The scene with the water elemental battle was filmed on set with recreations of buildings from Venice on top of a huge pool of water and blue screens as backdrops. While the scene utilized a ton of CG, most of the stunts were accomplished by Tom and his stunt doubles, Luke Scott and Greg Townley.
I never have a stunt double, it's always me.
VFX not only hid the wires required to help Tom jump from pole to pole and vault onto the Rialto Bridge, but filled in the backgrounds of Venice and, of course, brought the water elemental to life. There were no rigs or dummies used for the monster, which means the actors had to rely on their imaginations to really sell their performances. All of that water they were drenched with was real though, and very cold. Similar techniques were used for filming the scenes in London. While portions of the scenes set on Tower Bridge were filmed on location, they also filmed using set pieces such as the tour bus in front of green screens. The shots littered with rubble and broken down cars were set pieces in front of green screens too. For wide shots, Imageworks built a complete 3D model of Tower Bridge. This model was also used for filming all the destruction that took place during the climactic final battle. During all this action, we see tons of drones in various states of despair. Imageworks was able to create all of these broken bots by altering their original models. The drones were constructed out of various individual pieces, all coming together to form a single machine. Like the water elemental, the drones didn't use any objects on set as stand-ins to help the actors visualize the scene. Here's what Peter's final confrontation with Beck really looked like on set. Believe it or not, this scene, set in a vibrant field of tulips, was filmed in an empty grass lot in the UK. The jet and all the flowers were CG. Image Engine had to simulate an entire field of tulips with natural wind as well as the jet landing. Over 2 million tulips were simulated in this scene. There were 8 colors and 8 different tulips created for each color. In order to render all of them efficiently, they used a method called pre-caching, where software will download data ahead of time in anticipation of its use. That way, the computers weren't forced to simulate 2 million flowers at the same time. Stripped of CGI, this scene is just Tom Holland and Jon Favreau standing in some grass. Did you know Imageworks did VFX for all the previous Spider-Man movies? That's right, they provided effects for the original trilogy and The Amazing Spider-Man. Producers were actually reluctant to go to them again for the MCU installments since they wanted to give the third iteration of the hero a fresh new look. That was until they saw this test footage Imageworks whipped up to prove that they were up to the task. That's not Tom Holland in costume, that's completely CG. The 3D model looked and moved so convincingly that even Tom Holland himself was fooled. To innovate on their previous work, they focused on making MCU's Spider-Man the most realistic one yet. They did this by studying imperfections in Tom's movements from unused takes and incorporating them into the animated Spider-Man. Moments of hesitation or getting caught off balance helped make the CG Spidey feel far more grounded in reality than any of the previous films. While some of Spidey's suits are completely computer-generated and require a mocap suit, even the costumes on set require digital tweaking here and there. It can be as simple as removing wrinkles to keep the suit looking smooth, or adding wear and tear from the intense action sequences. Following in Tony Stark's footsteps, Peter enters the workshop in the back of the jet to build his own suit for the first time since he ran around Queens in sweats. While the shots of Peter entering are all CG, there was also a physical set for the workshop. After filming Tom on set, the holograms were added in post with VFX. Image Engine had to create an exact replica of the set in order to accurately layer the holograms and moving machinery over the real footage, bringing the workshop to life in the final product. This scene isn't just an important character moment for Peter, but a chance for the audience to see what goes into building a Stark Tech Spidey suit. Image Engine had to decide what the individual elements of the suit would look like, ultimately breaking it down into 3 layers for the construction process. There's a white wet fiber layer, a layer of black and red fabric detailing, and a layer for hard surfaces, such as the eyepieces and chest patches. The company in charge of VFX for the final battle in London, Imageworks, kept these details consistent when adding battle damage to the suit. If we look at his suit closely during his emotional reunion with MJ, we can see patches of white material where the suit sustained damage.
From epic battle scenes, impenetrable costumes, and impossible stunts, Marvel constantly has their fans' jaws dropping. With 98% of the footage from the MCU films being sent to the special effects editing professionals, it isn't hard to imagine how different our favorite Avengers look behind the scenes. But imagining and seeing are 2 different things. From Endgame to WandaVision and Peter Parker in between, you won't believe how dramatically different these Marvel scenes look without the power of VFX and CGI.
Just a big chocolate missile.
How iconic was this girl power moment in Avengers Endgame? However, while it may have come together seamlessly on screen, the arrival of the female Avengers took a bit more extra work behind the scenes. As you can see here, each Avenger had to be added in almost one by one. Some of them were included using special effects, and others just popped up from underneath the camera's view.
You got something for me?
Captain America's encounter with himself while searching for the Infinity Stones was already mind-boggling. But watching how they filmed the scene hurt our brains even more. Chris Evans filmed both parts individually with his stunt double, swapping roles between takes. The editors did their magic later on to make it seem as if it truly was a double trouble situation.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
Although heartbreaking, watching Tony Stark's sacrifice again is worth it, just to see how it looked behind the scenes. There was actually no Infinity Glove, no battle raging around him, and no Thanos looming over him, just RDJ's pure talent. This Vision versus Vision fight in WandaVision took a lot of work. Paul Bettany filmed this scene with his stunt double, and they later digitally enhanced his stunt double's face to look like Paul instead. You can also see that the upper part of Vision's suit, as well as the environment around them, was added in later with special effects.
But I'm not the true Vision.
Getting to see the true strength of Wanda's powers in WandaVision was epic, but the cast and crew weren't treated to the same experience while Elizabeth Olsen was filming. Without special effects, Wanda's combustion in the Westview town square kinda looked a little like an adult temper tantrum. But it's still impressive to think about how it all came together in the end. Stop it! This scene had our heart rates spiking, but we're glad to know Tom Holland wasn't in any danger filming it. Behind the scenes, Thanos' ship was actually just a green screen wall that Tom Holland was climbing while attached to a wire and wearing a motion capture suit.
We're too high up, you're running out of air.
That makes sense.
The final battle was much less anticlimactic behind the scenes than on screen. The majority of the time, the cast wasn't even on set with one another at the same time. The day where the Avengers charged was when they had the most people on set, and even that pales in comparison to all the digital enemies we saw in the final cut. If you look closely, you'll see the Avenger army charged into a green screen. Filming Black Widow and her motorcycle was an event that included a Harley bike specifically created for the film, stunt doubles, and motorcycle cameras. For close-up shots, they would film Scarlett Johansson at a standstill, but for action shots, they had her stunt double weaving in and out of cars while 2 cameras followed in front and behind on motorcycles of their own.
I'm always picking up after you, boys.
Not all special effects are done with VFX, especially in the first episodes of WandaVision. They swapped out Wanda's red waves of power for strings, poles, and simple speed adjustments to achieve that perfect 1950s style.
Well, please eat before it gets cold.
Sorry to disappoint, but Thanos, not real. Not even behind the scenes. In order to bring him to life, Josh Brolin had to wear a big motion capture suit, which made his battle for the Infinity Gauntlet with Captain America in Endgame a little awkward without all of the special effects. Captain America's shield was also added with VFX, meaning while filming, it was basically Chris Evans throwing an imaginary weapon at Josh Brolin while he pretended to get hit.
All 6 stones, I could simply snap my fingers.
Living on a land full of vibranium would be epic, but unfortunately, Wakanda was all green screen and special effects, including their futuristic planes. However, they still tried to make filming as realistic as possible, like the fight scene between T'Challa and M'Baku, where the set designer created a pretty realistic base for the shoot.
Glory to Hanuman.
Doctor Strange's cape for a lot of the scenes wasn't actually there. Benedict Cumberbatch would go through the motions of grabbing and putting on the cape, but it was added in later on using special effects. They just couldn't recreate how lifelike it was without help from the digital realm. However, in other scenes where it wasn't the main focus, it was just a part of Benedict's costume. Mark Ruffalo has expressed in the past how embarrassing it sometimes was to be dressed in a large motion capture suit around the rest of the Avengers cast. While we admit it looks a bit odd, it was also that the editing team could do their magic like in this scene with the Hulk and the Ancient One. He's wearing his suit, but also standing on an elevated surface, in a green screen studio instead of New York.
And Hulk. Smash.
It's obvious to see that the Spider-Man illusion battle was completely done using digital effects thanks to the company Framestore. However, how did they get Spider-Man to move so much like Tom Holland? Well, they made sure that they filmed the stunts and movements with Tom in a motion capture suit, so that they'd be able to add the extra realism to the scene. Zendaya's part was also added into the digital sequence later on. We saw plenty of different versions of Vision in WandaVision, however, what we didn't realize is that for a portion of the series, he was actually blue. Avatar blue. The showrunners worked with the makeup department to find what color paint would look the best translated in black and white. Turns out blue looked much better than maroon, and they stuck with the color through every black and white scene he shot.
Humans are odd.
Valkyrie's entrance was intense, but when you take a peek behind the curtains, the intensity is deflated. The horse she was riding was actually just an animatronic, and the area around her was completely green screen. Even Wanda's magical drop down was done with just Elizabeth Olsen and a harness. As much as we wish these portals were real, those magic rings we see in Doctor Strange are actually just shiny metal circles with a green screen backdrop. They were elevated to give the effects of the actors stepping in and did help them meet their marks, evidently adding a little more realism to it all.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying this film.
To get Captain Marvel in the air involved a lot of VFX, green screen, and major dedication from Brie Larson. The actress was attached to a contraption made of poles that allowed the film crew to rotate her and manipulate her in any direction they needed. This was all done in front of a green screen so that her powers, location, and even part of her suit could be added in during post-production. It takes a lot to make a superhero look fabulous. The Spider-Man cast didn't actually film in London, at least for this battle scene in Far From Home. The VFX team created a digital London for the film, while the actors performed in a studio with minimal props and structures compared to what we see in the final cut. Sorry to break the illusion, but Iron Man's suit wasn't actually physically there the majority of the time. Oftentimes, RDJ would just wear part of the armor on top of a motion capture suit. There were other scenes where he would wear a physically larger suit, with his helmet being the only part added with VFX. It really depended on what the script required of him that day.
Is everything a joke to you? Funny things are.
The Marvel creators got to spend extra time playing around with Falcon for his new series, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and we aren't complaining. They put in the work, researching and using footage from skydivers in order to get the perfect look for the Falcon's flying scenes. They seamlessly fit together raw shots and digital creations to give us these shots. Getting Chris Evans to look a lot smaller than he really was a challenge. The production team had to go through multiple steps. First, the scene was filmed with body double Leander Dini, who still had to diet for the role. They then digitally replaced his face with Chris Evans in editing. Sometimes they would even have to scale down the actor compared to the environment, depending on the scene. Iron Man wasn't the only one with cool gadgets at his expense. We got to see Happy's plane in Spider-Man Far From Home, and we were just as impressed as Peter Parker. However, behind the scenes, the plane didn't really exist. While they did build part of the interior as a set, the majority was created digitally. Watching how they filmed the Rocket Raccoon scenes is kind of unsettling. Take a look. Rocket was, of course, created digitally, but in order to capture realistic movements, Sean Gunn, the director's brother, acted out the scenes in a motion capture suit. Because of the animal-like movements he was able to replicate. The Vulture wasn't slick and fast, which means the Spider-Man filmmakers needed to make sure the Vulture's special effects portrayed his heaviness. It required some research on how humans look flying with jetpacks, so that they could replicate it and then add in those digitally created wings.
The streets of Free City are very much a world that feel a little bit like our own, but way better.
What movie magic transformed Ryan Reynolds into Dude? Free City is more like CGI City. Nothing in this world is possible without some incredible VFX.
Ryan Reynolds in this new improved body.
Originally, Dude was meant to look exactly like Guy, with Ryan Reynolds pulling double duty as both characters. But instead of taking the time to shoot Ryan acting twice and buff him up later in post-production, the crew decided to find a very beefy actor who could portray him instead. Aaron Reed was the chosen one.
Not true, I gained 312 pounds for this film.
Reed was shot using motion capture. Notice all those dots on his face? And in post-production, Lola VFX stitched Reynolds' face onto Reed's body, like a real-life Frankenstein situation.
He's spectacular!
For the fight with Dude, the team used wires, props, and mats to get the action just right. The scene definitely took some great fight choreography, and an amazing stunt team to pull it off. Also, many of the iconic props, like the Captain America shield, were filmed with plain-looking stand-in props, and then updated later with CGI.
That was dope.
Lots of stunt performers and VFX were involved with the fight scene that happened when Guy and Molotov Girl head to the stash house to retrieve her stolen code. The scene involved spawn points, tons of weapons, and video game fighting styles. Behind the scenes, people were being thrown onto mats while attached to wires, and performers were pretending to be hit by numerous projectiles and weapons. To get the motorcycle slide just right, Guy's bike was pulled forward with wires, and Ryan Reynolds' stunt double stepped in to do most of the dangerous stuff. It all comes together to create a perfectly chaotic scene, where players appear out of nowhere for an all-out brawl. And honestly, it looks like a pretty fun, albeit exhausting, day to have been on set.
Was that cool? It felt really cool.
A lot of the movie's most dangerous scenes were done as practical stunts with CGI added later. For the complicated construction site chase, it took a lot of planning, trained stunt performers, and VFX to get things right. Many of these injuries, like Guy's head becoming a little too friendly with a concrete pillar, are only possible in a video game and would surely send you to the hospital, or worse, in real life. To create this scene of Guy falling and landing in the bubble suit, the filmmakers used a stunt performer on wires, positioned against a green screen for close shots, and a digi-double version of Ryan Reynolds for the wide shots and extreme bounces. Once on the ground, Ryan was really filmed in a prop bubble, which was either really comfortable or really uncomfortable. We're not sure, but someone's gotta ask him.
And that was the heartbreaking story of Blue Shirt Guy.
Real cars were used on the streets of Free City, but they had a CGI layover put on top of them to make them look more unique, video game worthy, and futuristic. The movie director, Sean Levy, said,
"We want the world of our city filled with vehicles that aren't just everyday. We want them in models and customized editions and colors that are all kind of like dialed up reality."
With the CGI layover, they could smooth and round out the car's edges, add signs of damage, you name it, all without actually damaging or changing the cars. The vehicles ended up looking a little unlike models we have in real life, but close enough to be recognizable in the real world, and cool enough to be coveted by video game enthusiasts.
Impressive.
Adding all the chaos that surrounds the cars during epic chase scenes was also incredibly important to get the Free City world to really feel like a Grand Theft Auto-inspired universe, where there's all kinds of pandemonium. Pyrotechnics, sparks, and mayhem were added to these scenes while the stunt drivers cruised the streets, so they didn't have to deal with any real obstacles. You can see in this scene that some cars they hit aren't really there at all. including this massive pileup. The chase scenes got the action right by filming stunt drivers in front of green screens. They were filmed with a robotic motion-controlled camera moving on a track to keep things smooth, like when Channing Tatum's character does a slow-mo 360.
You're so hot.
Oh, I know.
Free Guy was shot in Boston, with a few reshoots taking place in LA, while the interiors were built on airport hangars or sound stages. But other cities like Seoul, Tokyo, Seattle, Pittsburgh, and even Christopher Nolan's Gotham City served as inspiration for how the video game world would look. To get everything right, the team actually created Free City twice, first as live-action footage with digital additions, and again as a fully CG environment. They created futuristic, unique, and dilapidated storefronts by using real buildings and overlaying them with CGI to turn them into the unique Free City shops that we see on our screens. Production designer Ethan Tobman said that they did a ton of branding and developed 2 stories of entire blocks with signage that you'd never see in the real world. Different cameras were used to distinguish between Free City and the real world. The video game scenes were shot with a large format camera and spherical lenses with a color palette that was almost animated, while the real life scenes were filmed in a more down-to-earth style with a more restricted color palette.
You're real. And I'm what? I'm what?
You're not.
When the glasses go on, the world becomes even more different. It's like The Truman Show, where the main character doesn't know what's really going on until he's given a way to see it. So there had to be a pretty big distinction between Guy's reality and the player's reality. To accomplish this, there's another layer of VFX creating what the game's players see, with director Sean Levy taking advantage of the fact that he was
the creator of that world within the world.
These images that appear all around Free City for players are meant to look even more animated and interactive than the Fantasy City does to its NPCs. The team also used different camera techniques when Guy puts on his glasses, like having it suddenly become first person and then filming from behind him, as if a video game player is actually changing their camera perspective.
Oh, that's not good.
The street squeeze scene looks like it could be right out of a superhero movie, which isn't so surprising considering the film's VFX supervisor, Sven Gilberg, also worked on Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame. In this scene, there were some real cars being driven by trained professionals, but for the most part, all the action was compiled together with some incredible VFX. These shots on the streets closing in, the streets crumbling, and cars being flung every which way were all added by the incredibly talented people at Scanline VFX. So don't worry, no stunt drivers were harmed in the making of this scene. The destruction of Free City was also a complicated scene.
Literally, the world can reshape.
It required incredible VFX, but it also required the actors to pretend that it was really being destroyed. Because in reality, all of that destruction was accomplished with some epic CGI that had the city pixelating into a million pieces. Scanline VFX was responsible for the scene, which had the world of Free City literally falling out from underneath its citizens' feet. For the stampede in the city, there were some real actors involved running for their lives. But there were also extra digital renderings of characters added in later to fill out the crowd. As for Guy finally reaching the Life Itself Island, you guessed it, the green oasis was entirely animated.
This is Free City, and the people who wear sunglasses are heroes.
Computer animation was also used to create these iconic scenes where players free fall and then glide into Free City. The scenes introduce us to what's really possible in the video game world. Some of the characters, like this guy, coming in like a flying squirrel, are entirely animated, but when characters are shown coming down in parachutes or getting close to the ground, they're really attached to wires on a crane. The crew had quite the complicated setup, prepared to get all these falling and flying scenes just right.
Behind the CGI of Venom, there are stunts, practical effects, and a ton of impressive acting. Venom is a really visually exciting movie to watch, especially because of the wild and shocking transformation we see Eddie undergo. The complex villain is brought to life thanks to some truly remarkable CGI. Behind the scenes is just as action-packed as the final cut of these films. Venom 2 definitely doesn't hold back on the wild action and impressive CGI work. These tendrils have a total life of their own in this shot, but behind the scenes, the Carnage arm grab looks pretty different. Instead of real tendrils, wires and harnesses did the heavy lifting to make sure the cameras captured what they needed. The restricted spin around while being held by wires looks far from comfortable to deal with, but it was well worth it considering just how epic the final result looks. While Tom Hardy gives a great performance, the shape-shifting transformation we see on screen from man to supervillain is all thanks to painstakingly detailed CGI work. The VFX team actually created animations for every single frame we see. While it took a lot of time and expertise, it was the best way to make sure the transformation looked as slick and real as it does. Every layer of the detailed animation images contributes to making Venom's interactions with people and the world look so convincing. One of the coolest scenes in the first Venom takes to the streets with this massive mess of black tendrils moving from flat on the ground to a powerful stance. While his movements look flawless in the final cut, behind the scenes was a very different story, as the actors were hard at work to perfect choreography to properly map out the movements. The CGI team needed the best footage to work with to bring Venom to the screen in such a central and powerful way. In the end, they definitely were not disappointed. The second Venom film features a pretty massive leap onto the hood of a car that's made to look like an effortless motion in post-production. But as we can see behind the scenes, a lot of prep had to be done and safety measures had to be considered for this superhuman moment. Seeing just how intense the stunt is without CGI is a great example of how much acting the performers need to do to appear as though these daunting tasks are totally effortless. Venom: Let There Be Carnage is filled with plenty of shooting scenes which, of course, are no match for the creature. The drama of it all is still as present without CGI, considering the high stakes and loud noises. All the flashes of light and details to support the storytelling are courtesy of added effects, since they were just shooting blanks on the set. The living room sequence in the first Venom film is one of the most intense battles, in part because of the power imbalance. 1 versus 3 hardly seems fair, except for when the one actually turns out to be pretty fine on his own thanks to the power of Venom. The CGI in this scene is key for showing the surprising and powerful transformation Tom Hardy goes through. A whole lot of stage combat and practical effects contributed to executing the battle so well. As he slowly discovers the sheer amount of power he has, Tom Hardy looks a bit crazy staring down at his fist as if it were a monster. And to be fair, with the CGI, monstrous is a pretty good descriptor for what we end up seeing. Part of what makes the CGI so effective is the fact that Hardy performed each of these scenes with 100% commitment, especially when he was embodying Venom. The motorcycle chase scene is one of the most complicated sequences shot for the first film, and an epic point of action. While the scene itself only lasts a few minutes, before filming even commenced, planning happened for months to make sure it could all be carried out efficiently while making sure the epic footage was still captured. What's even crazier is that the whole chase was actually filmed, and CGI was what managed to weave the whole scene together seamlessly, and with impressive detail no less. Stunt doubles took over for the actual riding on the streets. Robbie Madison and Joe Dryden performed legendary motorbike stunts. Considering all the planning, it's no surprise about 40 cars ended up being used and inevitably destroyed over the course of filming. While CGI did amp up the look of this nosedive through flames, stunt performer Dryden really did whip through fire to make sure the team had the best shot they could get. To be perfected, of course, with special effects. We get to see the Venom tendrils in full force when they bring Hardy's character to safety. Well, as safe as someone can be whipping through the city on a motorcycle. Filming in studio saw the actor maneuvered by a harness to move from floating in the air to regaining control. But the moment CGI came into play was when the scene really came to life. Robbie Madison looked danger straight in the face when he was preparing for the huge jump on the famously steep Bullet Hill. This was actually the performer's very first jump in America, and was it ever a cool one. Since the team was limited in how many times the stunt could be performed, they needed CGI to make sure the scene looked good in the movie. After 3 stunt jumps, Madison was able to really hear the sounds of the cars crashing, and the intensity of the whole experience hit him. The effects added in post made the jump look even more legendary. For the wicked motorcycle sandwich, the performers were in real cars, and Hardy was actually on top of a motorcycle. but the whole scene was filmed while the vehicles were stationary. Filming with a blue screen behind them, Hardy had some good opportunities to really perform well on the motorbike, and all the while not having to worry about his own safety. The CGI fills in the blank, adding the scenery and effects to amplify the intensity of this moment. This motorcycle slide is nothing short of impressive. The 2 weeks spent to create a specially designed metal plate for the motorcycle to attach to in order to safely whip around with such speed was well worth the effort. The experience of filming was pretty wild, and the final result adds a really cool, unexpected moment to the whole sequence. The visual details of Venom really complete the masterpiece. This apartment fight was pretty wicked, and included the vicious weight-throwing move. Luckily, the actors weren't in any actual danger since there weren't any real weights on the set. CGI isn't just used for big explosions and out-of-this-world creatures. Sometimes generating images for more typical or practical effects is what's needed. With major throws come a whole lot of wires and harnesses. While in the first movie we see exactly what outer force throws him around, behind the scenes it almost looks a bit more like magic since Hardy was hooked up to wires and harnesses, making sure the tricky stunts could be filmed safely. It looks incredible in rehearsal, so it's no surprise that the final product is a gem as well. Slamming into the wall over and over again can't have been the most comfortable experience for the actor though. There were a fair number of window jumps in the first Venom film. Some simple leaps from inside a corridor shattering glass in the midst, and in other cases, epic leaps through the air. In both cases, CGI played a key role, filling in the scenery and making performers look like they're really soaring. Especially when it came to all the Venom detailing. Thor might be the god of thunder, but the real gods when it came to this production were the gods of CGI. We've got 20 Thor scenes without CGI coming at ya that include everything from a mocap suited up Hela to Chris Hemsworth hanging upside down by chains. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard right. Let's go. If anyone knows how to land, it's Thor. Nice work, buddy. And just in case you doubted his power, the epic hammer does the trick. Is it just us, or is Hemsworth exuding pure glory? Good for you, God of Thunder. Need to look extra cool? Get you some fans and voila, superhero style. Could there be a more boss way to enter a scene? Okay, so it looks weird at first, but that's what CGI is for. Cate Blanchett creeps in front of the blue screen until bam! Cool green portal appears. Blanchett did have a real hammer in tow on set, but for the most part, what we see was thanks to the techies. The Grandmaster knows how to make a grand entrance. At least with the help of a mechanized platform and some of the strongest crew members we've ever seen. Seriously, a round of applause for the platform guys. Gotta give it to the Master too. He moves very smoothly for a 14 million year old.
Let's stop there.
What's he the god of? That's right. Thor's competition doesn't look nearly as intimidating without the special effects. Cue awkward-looking motion capture bodysuits. Just because they looked silly doesn't mean they were gonna go easy on Thor, though. The grim, mountain-filled background is far from the elaborate blue screen-filled studio they actually shot in, but hey, does the trick. Can you say quick change? Making that swap happen quickly and on cue with Hemsworth's command was all thanks to some image layering by the VFX team. Sure, the actors had to film the scene twice in different clothing, but surely that was a heck of a lot easier than actually figuring out how to magically change at the snap of Thor's fingers. A dash of landscape, a sprinkle of special lighting, and voila. Every good god knows no throne room is complete without a throne, even before CGI. Who needs the whole room once you've got the elaborate throne anyway? Blue screens and ramps pretty much do the same thing until the time when VFX can take over and dazzle. Probably the best part about this CGI magic is the fact that no one had to sweep that enormously long hallway.
You're in my seat.
Let's get one thing straight. Cate Blanchett knows how to work an amazing CGI transformation. Running your fingers through your hair is pretty special when you're an Asgardian goddess of death.
Nail.
Need some weapons and a full costume real quick? We can do you one better. Blue screens. Blanchett really brings it in this electrifying scene. Okay, well really, it's all the CGI team, but still. She gives off the right vibe. From the land to the flurries of wind and the electric current that lights up our screens, a masterful exhibition of both the VFX team's skills and Hella's. Two brothers, both of them gods and neither afraid to smack down. Yeah, they've got a complicated relationship, but they make a solid team. Hemsworth and Hiddleston's chemistry just makes it even better. Oh, and all those CG backgrounds and special effects to really convince us of their godliness. Valkyrie, you're supposed to stay inside the ship. Tessa Thompson is clearly jacked. That tight grip both on the outside of the ship and when she's at the wheel work. Thor has got some pretty solid company when Valkyrie is around. At first glance, it seems like there wouldn't be too much CGI done for this shot. Hemsworth is in a real environment and in the grass, but the transformation between what was filmed and what we got in the movie is stark. The most shocking of all? The grass. Unfortunately, natural grass wasn't quite up to snuff. Only the bit in front of Hemsworth stayed, and even still, it was enhanced. Watch out, Valkyrie coming in hot. The suit is great, but what really does it for us is the flowing blue cape. Tessa Thompson's ninja skills are on point as she fights, flies, and performs Valkyrie with undeniable enthusiasm and fire. This scene was in reality a lot less intimidating for the warriors who, instead of battle armor, were kitted out in those cute motion capture suits and valiantly heading towards a very safe-looking blue screen, instead of the chaos we actually get in the movie. These incredibly detailed special effects help these actors look as epic as possible. We've got regular Thor, Fat Thor, and Digital Thor. Yes, you heard that correctly. The stellar CGI team rendered a fully digital double of Hemsworth as Thor that could be used to fine-tune the details when blended with other special effects. But it was still all about Hemsworth. Yep. The actor was being body-tracked the whole time to use as a base. Plus, they wanted to capture all they could of that pretty face so that when combined with the digital Thor, we got the best Thor. The power forces between these characters is a bit insane. But on the set, the whole situation looks much less effective. Blanchett rocks the scene sporting an always funny-looking mocap suit, managing to perform as if she were kitted out to the nines in Hella's power suit. Not to mention the headdress. Unfortunately, this piece only came to life in the computer-generated world. Although Blanchett probably didn't mind because honestly, it doesn't look like it would be the most comfortable or practical piece to wear.
To be honest, I expected more.
Need to smoothly glide backwards? Chris Hemsworth might be offering a masterclass soon. Hemsworth just got hooked up to wires while the crew went at it with the giant rig controlling the Thor actor's movements. And it looks like it was quite the heavy rig to control. When was the last time you were in a 160,000 person stadium? Never? Same for the actors in this scene because guess what? They're all made by computers. Look how un-Thor-like Hemsworth looks fighting a Hulk that isn't even there. Those punches just don't land. Sorry, Chris. Parts of his arms and torso weren't quite good enough, so CGI leveled up when Hemsworth couldn't.
Get help. No, come on, you love it. I hate it.
Elevators were boring, until now. This duo rehearsed like mad to nail this sequence, and thanks to some CGI magic, they all pulled it off. It was a bad day to go against these brothers.
Oh, classic.
Thor hammer time, and boy, does Thor make it work. He didn't always have a real hammer, but Hemsworth knows the power of the hammer, and that was good enough for the cameras until CGI could jazz everything up. Thor's got himself in a pickle, hasn't he? Gotta give it to Hemsworth though, he managed to get all his dialogue out with blood rushing to his head. Surtur had it pretty easy when the actual filming happened, waiting until the editing phase to hop into that frame. So many people to reign over Asgard, so little time. There was Odin, Loki, and then of course, everything that went down during Ragnarok. Asgard was actually a pretty even combo of real outdoor spaces and blue screen-filled studios, but at the end of the day, we know.
Somebody better be bleeding, broken, or on fire.
When the Scarlet Witch was on set, the fire was always brought. Elizabeth Olsen was constantly hooked up to harnesses, rigged to wire tracks and suspended in air to portray all her Wanda magic. And sometimes with very little to work with visually. We've got 16 of her most impressive scenes without CGI coming right up.
Now I think we're just so excited.
Number 1. Seeing red? Nah, that's just chaos magic from the Scarlet Witch herself. Filming the actress, we get Christmas-themed colors, but nothing about her performance feels jolly. Olsen brings the fire while the VFX team brought the visual fire.
That's just very cool, and it's very satisfying.
Number 2. Wanda's powers were totally underestimated. This woman's pain built the entire city of Westview. A barren construction lot is all you need when the special effects and acting performances are this good. The 360 camera track that was set up around Olsen to capture all the magic only needed a touch of green screen to bring the whole image to life in such a stylistic way. The CG team went the extra mile, so convincingly constructing Wanda's world with the old-fashioned television visuals and all. Number 3. There was no doubt something strange happening in the town of Westview.
This is for us, so let me handle it.
Reaching her breaking point for all to see brought an incredibly powerful performance from Elizabeth Olsen, and very sophisticated special effects to show just how powerful her emotions and chaos magic were. Number 4. Who knew Witch versus Witch could be so intense? Kathryn Hahn and Elizabeth Olsen were defying gravity, literally, hanging opposite each other on a giant spinning rig in a set that looked more like a construction site than a place where a TV show was being made. Their major battle took place entirely in the air, with both actors hooked up to wires and wire tracks that allowed them to zoom through the air smoothly. Number 5. Her first full Marvel movie, she was gonna leave an impression. Make no mistake.
You see pictures of Scarlet Witch and she's always like that.
When Elizabeth Olsen took to the screen, we got a full blast of power. One of our first glimpses at just how strong she was came when she worked to clear Sokovia, pushing through to exert all those powers. Which, honestly, without the CG does kind of look hilarious, but her hand movements and choreography are still on point and exhibit all the grace we know she has. Who else can cause such damage with such elegance? Number 6. And she made him feel so real. Layers on layers on layers of light ray visuals came together to create the single powerful image as we see the vision we all want to see come to life. We'd never have guessed that in reality the room was pretty empty, save for those green screens. Three-dimensional models were rendered of each actor to bring this unique transformation. Wanda's powers are really all out for this one, and who can blame her? The Scarlet Witch was ready to be seen. Number 7. The Power Hands choreo just keeps coming. Almost anyone else would look ridiculous doing these intricate and delicate moves, but Olsen pulls it off like a natural.
That's what makes her unique.
No question she's the perfect Scarlet Witch.
It's not just shooting energy towards robots. There's some things that aren't just about like being harmful.
Her powers really can do it all. Defending and battling, sure, but her ability to move objects and help her cohorts out when they need it makes her that much more powerful. Who else could give the Cap such a solid boost? Number 8. Is this the most boss lineup we've ever seen? We're marveling hard at these female Avengers strutting on a set that honestly is pretty amazing as is. Sure, they weren't all actually in the room together filming at exactly the same time, but we get the point. It works.
Everyone's just kind of taking their turns moving around, trying to help each other out.
The CG team's job was much easier working with this as a base as well. Everything had a way of coming together pretty seamlessly. Number 9. Having to go through it again and again? That's gotta hurt. Just as quickly as he came back into her life, he was gone. And in an incredible visual display thanks to the CG team. What started as a green screen became a multi-layered image to bring both realistic backdrops and the extra magic on top. It was painful to watch, but that light brings the beauty.
We'll say hello again.
How How long do we think these two were standing together in such stillness for this painful moment to be captured? Number 10. No one was going to keep her away from Vision. When she wanted in, Wanda got in. No need for huge displays of power. A simple hand gesture and some red CGI light added to the picture are all you need when you're the Scarlet Witch. Window busting? Piece of cake. Render some shattering glass visuals and we're all set. Number 11. Wanda's powers came with the help of a whole lot of crew members, since the style they were looking for was a pretty specific kind of movement.
That's a surprisingly hard thing to do in CG.
Puppeteering for real was the way to go. Meanwhile, special effects could help hide all those real wires. It was pretty hard to ignore for the actors, since they had crew members getting right up close and personal with them, and the floating props. Items were hooked up to the floor, hanging from the ceiling, across rooms. Whatever they needed, they rigged it. And to add a bit of extra pizzazz, the CG team would sprinkle in some janky moving items to blend in with the image. Number 12. Wanda wasn't about to waste any time getting back to work. She already had that fantastic Scarlet Witch suit on, so why let it go to waste? Green screen, boss outfit, the signature glowing red CGI, perfect setting for reading the Darkhold and planning her next steps. Now that she'd embraced all that chaos magic power, the possibilities are endless. Props to Olsen for holding that cross-legged position while rigged to those wires for so long. Number 13. When they want to stop, the train better stop, or else they'll make it. Luckily, the train they were stopping was already stopped and still on set, making the job a whole lot easier for them, but a bit harder for the CG team to make it look active. Mix in those powers from the Power sibling duo and they were set. Blue and red lights have never been more powerful. Number 14. Crew assembled, the airport fight is on. Even with the tech and green screens around, it looks like this was an epic day on set. That many stars running together, that much power, that much talent, that's enough on its own. Plus, they all really bring the heat on this one. Olsen was ready to fight. We'd want her as a teammate any day. Number 15. Incoming, it's a Wanda flying in. Olsen got used to being in a harness for filming the better half of the last few episodes of the series. She was swooping in with all the grace in the world. Toss in the jazzy red glow hands to spice the picture up and we're in business. Even when she's wearing sweats. Number 16. It's a Whole New World, live in color. 4 different colored versions of the images were combined to create that TV-like texture. The twinkle effect nod to that era of shows made for a perfect detail. Thank you, CG team. Oh, not to mention that extra upgrade that came along. Slick and convenient assembling of furniture. When Elizabeth Olsen is around, you know a scene is going to be good. When the CG team is on the job, you know the scene is going to be great.
Here we are, behind the scenes, with Loki.
There's no denying the magnetic appeal of Loki. Tom Hiddleston's incredible performance gets most of the credit, but even he needs help bringing the trickster god to life on film. To celebrate Loki getting his very own series, we're giving you a look at some behind-the-scenes magic of how Marvel brings the god of mischief to the screen in all his glory.
Loki is still working on that, I think.
For this scene from Thor: The Dark World, the first thing they filmed was Tom Hiddleston doing an impression of Captain America as Loki, complete with Cap's costume. There wasn't a technical reason for this. Apparently Tom just really wanted to wear the costume.
It's not going to be you though. We're going to get Chris to shoot it when he's on set, and he said, no, this is my one chance to wear Captain America's suit.
Later, Evans was shown the footage and did his best to mimic Tom's performance, replacing it in the final product.
It's him doing an impression of me, doing an impression of him. And it's brilliant.
A good villain needs a grand entrance, and Loki certainly doesn't disappoint. Loki's entrance in the first Avengers movie is a memorable one, thanks in no small part to the VFX team. Even without the final polish and the wires still in sight, this shot of Tom performing this stunt is just as impressive as the finished shot from the movie, where Loki leaps through the air and takes down a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent.
Always try and enjoy myself, to be having the best time.
Speaking of dramatic entrances, this scene from the first episode of Loki where he's being processed by the TVA was achieved with a real trapdoor and Tom Hiddleston on wires. He was hooked up to a rig to achieve a controlled drop, ensuring his safety as they filmed the stunt. Luckily, Tom already has a lot of experience doing wire work since Loki always seems to be getting tossed around.
Just me jumping into trenches in the set.
Creating that iconic scene where Loki gets Hulk smashed was tricky. You can't exactly do that with stunt work. To pull this off, Tom had a wire attached to his ankle with a mat on the floor to catch him.
And 3 of the strongest stunt guys holding the wire at the other end.
They waited to interrupt his villainous monologue and yanked hard, pulling Tom out of frame and down onto the mat. The rest was done with hard work from the special effects department.
The experience of being yanked out of frame was one I will not forget in a hurry.
Loki and Thor's banter in this scene from Thor: The Dark World, where they break out of Asgard, is unforgettable, as well as a brilliant mix of practical and special effects. Chris and Tom filmed this scene on a set of the ship's interior, with special effects creating the holographic interfaces and adjusting the lighting accordingly. While Thor practically throws Loki out the door, Chris gives Tom a light shove, who then has to throw himself out of the door onto a mat below.
I mentioned I love my scenes with Chris. In every film, there's a two-hander where we kind of touch on this.
Odin's emotional departure in Thor Ragnarok took place on a beautiful, scenic cliffside that doesn't actually exist. These scenes were filmed in a grassy field, with the future locations of New Asgard being entirely built around them using CGI. Another surprising use of digital effects in this scene is Odin's eye patch, which was changed in post from the plain black eye patch Anthony Hopkins wore while filming.
Yeah, dead easy. Well, it's a trick.
Dramatic entrances probably run in the family, because as soon as Hela arrives on the scene, you know she means business. Thor and Loki immediately know she's going to be trouble and suit up. To get this magical costume change, Chris and Tom were filmed entering in both costumes. The footage was spliced together, and the effects team created Thor's lightning and Loki's signature green shimmer of magic to create a transition between these changes, putting them together for one seamless shot.
Loki was a bad guy. Well, Loki was a misunderstood guy.
We love seeing the Odin sons work together, like when they teamed up in the Dark World. Using Loki's illusion magic, they fooled Malekith into believing Loki had betrayed Thor, going as far as pretending to cut off Thor's hand and give up Jane Foster.
It's very accurate.
In this shot, Loki literally kicks Thor while he's down, sending him rolling. On set, it was Hiddleston, delivering a kick that didn't connect, and Hemsworth was pulled away using wires.
Never was torturous at all, so I'm incredibly proud of this.
While there were parts of Thor and Loki's confrontation with Malekith that were filmed on location in Iceland, taking advantage of some barren, volcanic landscapes, the more effects-heavy shots were filmed on a green screen set. This behind-the-scenes footage really gives you an appreciation for the amount of faith actors have to put into their directors and their special effects team. There's an art to the physicality of performances, with invisible elements like CGI magic, and Tom pulls it off beautifully. While it may look silly on set, the final product was anything but. It can be surprising exactly which elements of a scene are created using CGI. Like Loki's chains in the Avengers. Yeah, for whatever reason, those were CGI, not part of Tom's costume like they were for Thor: The Dark World. Loki's restraints and muzzle add a lot of context to these shots, so the behind-the-scenes footage of the closing scene looks pretty different without them. Props to Tom for being able to convincingly move like someone in chains, even limiting how much he moved his mouth and jaw.
I think, well, there was always going to be an unanswered question of what on earth happened.
Getting Hulk smashed became an Odinson tradition in Thor Ragnarok when Thor faced off against Hulk in the arena. Loki, clearly still holding on to some baggage from his fight with Hulk, is thrilled to see Thor get the same treatment. Of course, Tom didn't actually have a spectacular fight to react to. You would never guess that the only thing he's really looking at is a room full of cameras and crew. In the first Avengers movie, Thanos uses one of his followers, referred to as the Other, to keep an eye on Loki and monitor his progress conquering Earth. The final cut only kept one of their conversations in, with some horrific implications that Loki was being threatened with torture. But there were several more exchanges between the two that got left out. These deleted scenes are unfinished, but give us an idea of what the raw filming process looked like. While the Other himself was achieved with practical effects, played by Alexis Denisov in sculpts and makeup, the alien world he hangs out in when speaking to Loki was mostly blue screen.
They followed me into
some interesting corners.
In the first Thor movie, we meet the Frost Giants, and later learn that Loki was originally the son of their king, not Odin. Most of the Frost Giants, or Jotuns as they're also called, were filmed using practical effects. The actors would spend hours having sculpts and makeup applied to them to achieve just the right look. But this lengthy process wouldn't have been practical for Tom's brief scenes in Loki's Jotun skin. Instead, his red eyes and blue skin were added in post.
As soon as I look in the mirror after I've been through, it's like, wow.
Ever wonder why Loki's helmet has changed so many times since the first Thor movie? Even putting on the helmet was more complicated than you think, since Tom couldn't just pull it on over his head. The final product used in Thor actually had to come apart in 2 pieces, which would be snapped together to encase Tom's head. According to him, it was like having his brain cooked. All of his body heat would build up under the helmet, driving him a bit mad, which he says he used to fuel his performance. That's probably why we see a lot less of it in the Avengers, and it didn't return until Thor Ragnarok, with a more minimalist redesign.
You have to be careful what you let in because that can sort of spill into what you're doing.
Last but not least is this deleted scene from Thor. It's a fun character moment where Loki gets to cause some mischief. After being mocked and laughed at, Loki gets even by turning a goblet of wine into snakes. The effects are unfinished, and there's even some shots where lighting rigs are still visible. Props to this extra who had to convincingly react to a magical prank that wasn't actually happening. Did you know Tom originally auditioned for the role of Thor? They said his look wasn't quite right for the role, but when they saw him, they knew almost immediately they needed him to play Loki. From the massive popularity his character has achieved, it's easy to see they made the right call.